What do you get when you combine deviousness with incompetence? You get a government bureaucrat, and that government bureaucrat who thinks he is entitled to a big salary, as well as generous health care benefits and generous retirement benefits, all at your expense, believes that he or she rules over you. This is something we're dealing with on a daily basis, especially in the western states where we have so much involvement from the federal government in our daily lives. All of these large agencies, EPA, USDA, you've got the BLM, all involved meddling. U.S. Forest Service, I don't know that they're quite as bad, but you've got all of these other organizations meddling in our daily lives. And I bring this up, the story that happened a couple of weeks back over in eastern Idaho, where a boy was out walking his dog, and they were 350 yards from the family home on the family property line when the boy saw something and thought it looked like a pipe, and he bent down and touched the cap on it. The top popped off. He and the dog were sprayed with cyanide. The dog died. The boy now is experiencing some severe headaches. It may well be due to that exposure. His dad's a doctor. It could well be that if you're going to be filing a lawsuit in a situation like this, you have to say that you've got some issues, some health issues. I don't doubt it. I've never been sprayed with cyanide, but I'm sure that it can have some very, I think the word would be deleterious effects on your health. As it turns out, government worker placed that cyanide bomb there. The government's argument is, well, it helps us keep control of the coyote population. The coyotes come along. Coyotes will tap the top of that thing. The cap pops off, gasses the coyote's dead. According to one investigator looking into this, the sheriff who was involved from that part of Idaho, he says now that because of the direction of the wind, the boy is alive. The wind blew most of the cyanide, blew some of it on him, into his eyes and on his clothes, but blew most of it away in the direction of the dog, which is why the dog bought the farm and not the boy. If the wind had been blowing in a slightly different direction, the boy could be dead too. Or the boy could be dead, and the dog would have been left barking out of alarm that here's a dead child, caused by your government and your tax dollars at work. They have not yet released the name of the government worker who planted that cyanide bomb in that neighborhood. Not out in the middle of the forest, in that neighborhood. I guess because government feels it's none of your business. On the other hand, it's beginning to sound as if he will face charges for what he did, and when that happens, we'll know who this dope happened to be. We've got a little more on this today because there's a long story in the Idaho Statesman published today about all of this. The Deseret News out of Salt Lake City also following up on it, and it's one of those rare times when I believe, and I want to get to another point about this in a moment, that will tell you that the guy who actually planted the bomb may have been violating department policy, or the department has decided to throw him to the wolves, no pun intended, and it will claim they backdated a policy. But this is from Deseret News. There are rare moments when some liberals and some conservatives actually agree on things. A writer at the newspaper in Salt Lake City says multiple groups have joined forces demanding a branch of the U.S. Department of Agriculture stop using M44s or spring-loaded cyanide bombs in Idaho to kill coyotes after a family pet died earlier this month. Western Watersheds Project, Predator Defense, and Wild Earth Guardians are among those organizations that formally petitioned wildlife services to stop using the devices and also called for the immediate removal for all existing bombs in the state. And here's a quote: "Cyanide bombs are indiscriminate killers that must be banned," said Andrea Satisari, a senior lawyer with the Center for Biological Diversity. She went on to say any animal that might pull on the baited trigger is at risk, including endangered wildlife such as Canada lynx, grizzlies, as well as people and pets. All true. All true. One of my coworkers said this morning, if you're trying to get rid of coyotes, just shoot them. No, we'll plant bombs all over the neighborhood, and that'll do the trick, won't it? The idea that somebody else might be using the neighborhood doesn't apparently occur to some of the government bureaucrats who are behind this lunacy. Now, the Department of Agriculture is telling both of these newspapers today, the Deseret News and the Statesman, In November, according to the department, it ordered a stop to the use of these cyanide bombs. Then why is a department worker going out and planting these in residential neighborhoods throughout Idaho? This is this is why I say I think that worker is being used as a scapegoat. Oh, we stopped using cyanide. Quickly, we've just backdated a memo here. It says, yeah. He may not have seen it because we backdated it, but see, it says November 15 on it. Yeah, that's the ticket. So obviously, our coworker was incompetent and clearly meant harm. So we're going to have to fire him. And well, if he goes to jail, I guess that's okay. But don't sue the rest of us, please. We have been dealing with this in the western part of the country for how long? This type of action, this type of behavior. And nobody even told people in these neighborhoods that these bombs, these canisters of poison, were anywhere near their homes. Nobody. 812, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Government, though, we saw with the Gold King mine disaster with the EPA, government bears no responsibility when it has a major snafu. It just simply ignores it and continues to go ahead with what it's done before. And that is ignore everybody else, ignore any sane input, and go ahead and repeat the process. Speaking of which, there's also a story in the Statesman this morning. Mike Simpson, member of the U.S. House of Representatives, I don't know what he was doing in Boise. I thought they were still legislating in Washington at the moment, but he was making an appearance at a conference in Boise, and he said he is working to try to move the Bureau of Land Management from Washington to the west. Now, one argument is if they put it in Denver, it'll be a lot more attuned to what happens in western states. Being far away in Washington and being isolated from what life is really like here, according to some of the people who'd like to see it move, being isolated from all of us, bringing them here would allow them to get a better understanding of what we're like, what our needs are, and perhaps change the culture at BLM. Simpson says he's actually suggested Boise would be a good location and not Denver. Now, I don't always agree with Mike Simpson, but on this case, I do halfway. That is because I have been reading some of the conservative think tanks, the work that these people are doing back in Washington, and there's a fear that if you move some of these offices to the west, that instead of adopting the culture here, they'll bring the bureaucratic culture with them. And it suggests that if you look at what happens in some state capitals in various places around the country, you can get an idea of what they're talking about. So by diffusing the government, you're only going to plant more of these government liberals who think that you owe them and that they don't serve you, which it's supposed to be. But again, they feel that you somehow owe it to them. And you're only going to transplant that culture. But see, in Denver, this is why I say I think Simpson's halfway right. In Denver, it's already stuffed with liberals. So it wouldn't change things a whole lot there. But in Boise, we've already got enough in the way of liberals moving into Boise. We don't necessarily need a few thousand more. We have a caller with us. It's 8:15. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Yeah, Bill, the irony of what you're talking about with the cyanide bombs, it was just as thick you cut it with a knife this morning because I'm going bear hunting this year, and the Fish and Game requires that I let them know where I put my bait out for my bears. I've got a pile of donuts and fruit pies, and the government needs to know where that pile of donuts and fruit pies is at so they can monitor what I'm doing, but yet they can put cyanide bombs all over the place.
Yeah, the danger of a bear coming along and eating one of those blueberry pies could be, just wreak havoc on the environment for decades to come.
Yeah, isn't that a pile of irony for you? Thank you.
Thank you much for the telephone call. I have not had any of those fruit pies in a while, but I used to really like the little pecan ones too. But the blueberry, the blueberry, were they Dolly Madison? I've forgotten the brand now, but that's a story for another day. Yeah, you've got to tell us where you're depositing the pies, but we're going to be putting deadly poison out here. Pay no attention to that. Meanwhile, talking about moving some of these government offices to the west, in Montana, the governor there, Steve Bullock, he's a Democrat, he said that he's not waiting for the federal government to work closer with western states. He's gone ahead and embedded a state staffer in the Forest Service's Northern Regional Office in Missoula. He says he hopes that will speed communication and policy exchanges. Do you think that the federal workers actually pay any attention to what a state worker tells them? I mean, they may listen, they may nod their heads and put on a good show, and then it's like, get out of here. We're the federal government. We know better than you do. Get out of our way. And being a Democrat, I'm sure he knows that as well, but it's good window dressing in this particular situation. And it shows us the mindset of the left, and that if they just, well, I opened an office, problem solved. Yeah, we got one of our guys over there. Pay no more attention to this. Because the liberals, they like this federal government interference. Once again, because liberals believe they know best. And the way they see it, there are far more liberals in Washington. And you idiots here in the West, you need to have these people come out here and look after you. Because you're so dang dumb, you wouldn't be able to manage the environment or the lands on your own. That has been, of course, a liberal policy going back over 100 years in this country. And it is nowhere near what the founding fathers envisioned when they put the country together. I had an opportunity over the weekend. I didn't see it when it was first released nearly a decade ago, but I watched the John Adams film on television over the weekend. It was long, 7 episodes, and these were very long episodes. I split it over Saturday and Sunday. The arguments that went on in the early days of this republic, and just the stellar character of these men and what they were suggesting and what they were proposing. We don't have anybody in government any longer. And, you'll say, well, Donald Trump is going to turn things around. Donald Trump has some notion that things are out of control, but I wouldn't call him a constitutionalist. And I think to sit here, now, if he gets the ball moving in the right direction, I'll stay behind him. But I don't think that he's a guy who can sit down and articulate, okay, this is what those founders believe. This is what we're going to restore. He is more of a big government guy. He doesn't have that libertarian or conservative strain in him, or even constitutional strain. In some areas, yes, I suppose, but not otherwise. He's talking about a big healthcare plan again last night during a dinner with Chuck Schumer and some of his pals from Capitol Hill. It's funny, when he needs them, they're all his best friends. 19 minutes after 8 o'clock, I referenced a wee bit earlier pies. I've been staying away from pies. I'm down another 5 pounds, stepped on some scales yesterday, and I'm happy to note that is because of the total body transformation system, of which I've been a participant in for about 5 months now. And I've been telling you about it for a number of months on the air as well, and I'm going to actually get some measurements done today to see how big my waist is, because my pants have gotten very, very loose. And I got to keep buying new belts all the time for that reason. It's supported by a brilliant scientific team from some of the top research universities in the country, scientifically proven to burn 6 times more fat and you lose 8 times more weight than normal results from diet and exercise alone. The meal replacement plan often healthier than what you've already been eating. And I want to point out you can still have a healthy amount of calories, and the cost on a monthly or over several months would be about the same as the groceries, the meals that you're already eating that you would be replacing. And the average participant will lose 22 pounds and 4 inches off their waist. Call Don Chandler at 731-3560, 731-3560. In about 15 minutes, 10 minutes, we're going to pick up a conversation with the folks from Tripp Family Medicine about elder care. We had been talking about this a few weeks ago, and a lot of people out there are caring for relatives, and it can be strenuous. We're actually going to have an RN join us. I believe it's an RN who's going to join us as well and talk a little bit about this, and we'll be available to answer some of your questions if you've got a question or comment about how you can go about this and look for some relief. We do it every Wednesday between 8:30 and 9 o'clock with Tripp Family Medicine. They have a great slogan, life's too short not to feel good, and I tend to agree with that. I also wanted to point out, if I could for just a moment, the office is located on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office, right here in Twin Falls. I was at the post office yesterday. Luckily, I didn't have to go stand in a long line. I just drove up to the box and dropped off a letter. I have this today. Speaking of government issues, we've been talking a little bit about government incompetence. Did you hear the story a couple of weeks ago? You got some liberals who think that we should be giving some animals rights. In other words, they should get the same rights as we have, constitutional rights. Yeah, well, they don't believe in most of those constitutional rights anyway. I don't know why they'd want to apply them. But they're saying that gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans should have, because their brains are very similar, smaller for the most part, but similar to ours, and there's some genetic, relations that we should. I don't know how a gorilla defends itself on the witness stand during cross-examination. Very well said. Well, because you were a victim and held in a zoo for many, many years, therefore we will exonerate you because of our own past crimes. Maybe we should put the liberals in the zoos, and just because I think that the apes would probably have a better honor code, at least out on the streets, and they wouldn't put up with any guff from anybody. That's another part of this. Speaking of decisions made by liberals that harm all of us, I wanted to share this from the Daily Signal today. Walter Williams, Dr. Walter Williams. Did you know that a few years ago, under the Obama White House, there was a survey done to determine how many students were being suspended from schools across the country? As it turned out, black students were far more likely to be suspended than white students. The Obama White House thought that was racist and it hurt the feelings of black students, so it needed to be addressed. They had two choices. Number one, they could suspend more white students. The problem was more white students weren't being suspended in the first place because they weren't getting in trouble, at least to the point where they could be suspended. You have to do something really erroneous, serious at school, seriously wrong to be suspended. I remember that from my own days when I was back in high school. So the government said, well, if we do that, we just start suspending whites to try to make it even. Then we're going to get some blowback because people will say those white kids didn't do anything wrong. So therefore, how are you getting away with this? So the Obama White House was left with another choice, and that was not suspend black students who did bad things. All right. I know you're saying to yourself, well, we wouldn't want to hurt their feelings, so I completely understand the government's position on this. Now, Mr. Williams, or Dr. Williams, writes, driven by the pressures from the White House, school districts revised their discipline procedures by cutting the number of suspensions. Rather than punish a student through exclusion, restorative justice is what it's called. Restorative justice encourages the student who has misbehaved to reflect on his behavior, take responsibility, and resolve to behave better in the future. I'm sorry I was smoking dope in the bathroom and burned it down. Can I go down to the timeout room and play with the puppies and color in the coloring books? Yes, you may, and after you've thought about it for a while, you can come back and disrupt class, and nobody will learn, but you won't have your feelings hurt. And the government will be happy because you didn't get suspended. Williams writes, and I'll get to our callers in just a moment. We'll get to our next caller in about 30 seconds. The results of this new policy have turned out to be increased violence, drug use, and there's more gang activity on school grounds. Thank a liberal today for such a wonderful decision. Well, hey, they blame 14-year-old girls for their own rapes in schools. It used to be if somebody got raped on a college campus, two students slept together because they were drunk. The girl wasn't responsible, according to liberals, even though she might be 21, 22 years old. A 14-year-old gets raped by a couple of illegal immigrants. The liberals suddenly say, well, they're victims because they're Latinos. Therefore, she must have done something wrong. And they start arguing the she wanted it defense. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com at 827.
Well, the government bureaucrats have controlled the EPA, and with Trump's warning of executive order yesterday, rolling back those things. This is the first time in 47 years that the environmental activists, extremists, haven't controlled the EPA. And these other agencies are in the same ballpark. I mean, they've been totally out of control, not thinking about anything common sense. It's non-scientific. And so, it's really interesting that, all of a sudden they're upset. Well, we've had to deal with this stuff for almost 50 years. Gina McCarthy and predecessors in these various agencies have just put forth a political agenda to basically implement Agenda 21 under the United Nations.
I read this morning how many billions of dollars we're going to save just before the end of the decade by rolling back these regulations, especially with energy costs.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it should be a huge boost to the U.S. economy.
Oh, absolutely. And, I personally have lost 2 good jobs because of these unscientific rules and regulations. And many other people, my friends, have lost jobs because of these things. And so we need to, I'm cheering Trump on this issue. Pruitt is the first EPA administrator in almost 50 years that's not in the back pocket of the environmental extremists.
Yeah, well said. And I thank you much for the call. We've got a short break. As I mentioned earlier, talking medicine over the next half hour of the program, and then coming up following 9 o'clock news. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that argument, that rape situation in Maryland. The liberal lawyers representing the criminal aliens, and they are here illegally, despite the rape. They've already broken one law. We'll have more on that coming up in about 40 minutes, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 36. Top story with Bill Colley.